Hello everyone, welcome to Medianama. In September this year, Bharti Airtel released an AI-based solution to detect spam on its network. This solution relies on various parameters such as the caller or message sender's usage pattern, call and SMS frequency, call duration, and other factors to identify spammers. Interestingly, Airtel isn't the only company to launch such a solution. One day after Airtel's announcement, BSNL also said that it's in the final stages of creating an AI-based spam solution. All of this comes after the fact that in June last year, the Telecom Regulatory Authority released directives instructing telecom companies to adopt AI ML based spam solutions for their networks. Within the spam discussion, one clear question that emerges is what happens to existing solutions like TrueCaller. To understand the spam and scam problems and to get TrueCaller's perspective on telcos launching their spam detection solutions, we spoke to TrueCaller's co-founder and chief strategy officer, Nami Zarringhalam.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I think spam has been an issue in India for a very long time, and it's escalated and morphed into spam, leading to scam in the last few years, especially. And Truecaller has been a critical part of this ecosystem in terms of helping consumers detect spam. You now have competition from telecom operators in a sense, right? So, firstly, I just wanted to understand what are your thoughts on network centric spam detection solutions rather than cloud-based, user-based spam detection solutions. Do networks have an advantage over what you have?
I think it's thanks for having me on the call. I think networks do have something OTT apps don't have, which is complete coverage of their own customer base. So of course they have that. But then when you look at like the network that TrueCaller has, and kind of reconcile with the fact that spam is not an isolated Airtel issue, like it's not an isolated issue where it only happens on the Airtel carrier. I think you kind of quickly realize that for this to be solved on like a society level, you need to allow private entities that can have access to that can have access to the complete user base of all the carriers to actually try to address the issue. And I think while it's great that Airtel is doing its part to try to keep their network free from spam, it's not going to fix the issue in society. Neither is it going to fix, in my opinion, neither is it going to fix the issue on Airtel's network necessarily. Because what happens is, India is a very, very vibrant country with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of small businesses and large businesses, and a daily way of communicating with your customers is through making calls. Now, TrueCaller used to think, in all honesty, back until between when we founded the company in 2009 up until 2013, we used to think that we knew what was best for the customer, and we would take that choice proactively for the customers. It wasn't until we actually traveled to India the first time, for like our first time traveling to India, that we realized that we were actually completely mistaken. And it came, it was a funny story. We were speaking to our cab driver and asking him about what he thought about TrueCaller. And he said, no, I like it. It works great, etc. And then we asked him, well, what is it that you don't like? And then he mentioned that he had asked for, or he had applied for a credit card. and the credit card, like the bank, had called him to let him know that he was going to get a credit card. Now, that call was blocked by TrueCaller. And why was it blocked? Because the community had informed each other that this was, this bank was making spam calls. And so something that was important for him to run his business, his life, basically, with a credit card, was taken away from him because of the choice that TrueCaller had made. And he was very humble. He tried to be like, it's not a big issue, etc. And then we asked other people, and they're like, oh, getting a credit card in India is a huge thing. At least back in 2013 it was. And he was like, yeah, no, it's okay, etc. That day, the first thing we did when we arrived to our then office in India was to actually turn that feature off. Like that we don't take the decision for the users. And now coming back to where we are today, I think the fact is that we see like the community that TrueCaller is building as a much bigger total value. The community generates much more value than each piece individually. And so if you're just trying to, for instance, read the signals without understanding the preference of each individual in that community, I think you could actually be erasing potential value for the community. And I think that's a downside to it. And I understand why they came to the conclusion that they needed to do what they introduced the service that they did. I applaud them for their effort, but I still believe that the community way of letting the community decide this and on an individual basis set your preferences is actually the only right way to go about it. And you need to have private entities that can do this without being forcefully fit into a specific partnership and kind of a incentive alignment with carriers or CPaaS companies, the ones who are actually distributing the phone numbers to the businesses, or with the regulator. So I still believe that TrueCaller's position in this is very strong, and it'll keep growing.
So what you're saying is that you have a community layer but the community can be wrong. So are you saying that your solution is customized to each individual user and their preferences?
Yes,
because you can also get it wrong at times, right? Because you'll
of course,
just adding another layer of signals to the mix.
I mean, the difference is, when a user, say Hitesh, says that I actually don't think that ICICI Bank is a spammer, or like my what do you call it, bank person, who calls me is a spammer, for him it will not be a spammer anymore. And it will continue to be a verified call maybe and all these things, but for him it will not be a spammer. Whereas, when the same bank person calls Nikhil will be like, I have nothing to do with ICICI. Why are you calling me? Mark it as spam. And so for different people, getting access to the information is important, but it's equally important that they can set their own preferences. And that enables them to kind of live their daily life in an efficient way. And that's basically all that TrueCaller is about, like the safety and efficiency of your daily communication. And so, yes, there are more signals, the community signal, but also the personal preference of each individual user. And they can set those preferences, and they do that on a daily basis. When you block something, you are setting your preference. When you unblock something or say like, no, this was not spam, you are setting your preferences. And that's the feedback loop that we have, that I think many think very little of, but we know it's kind of part of our flywheel that makes the service so great.
So one of the things, I mean, what you mentioned about, for example, ICICI Bank calling someone for a credit card, one of the things that we have understood from our conversations with users is that, for example, they've ordered food on Zomato, then sometimes the Zomato delivery person's number is being marked as spam or a suspected spam by the telecom operator. And that becomes a concern for the businesses. Is there, I'm just curious about whether you worked with businesses to solve some of these issues as well, because just because you don't have someone's number in their address book, or they've been calling a lot of people just because they're delivery personnel as well. So is there also a business problem here to solve, and how have you solved that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that was kind of my point with that. You have to take on a responsibility, which is about the livelihood of the people you're trying to protect, and so we take that responsibility very heavily, and we think about that in all parts of our product, so that we don't make these mistakes. And every now and then we also will make those mistakes. But the great thing about how TrueCaller works is that you have this feedback loop that is instant, and it learns from your preferences. So I think that's one of the ways that we change that. And the second, come back to your question now, is like, how do we collaborate with these businesses so that they can do what they need to do? Like, I asked for Swiggy to deliver me food. Now I'm expecting this service. And as part of that workflow, they need to be able to call you to tell you whether they dropped off something, or they need to get passage from the gate, or something like that. And they need to be able to call you. And how do we make that more efficient? So we've actually, with our TrueCaller for Business kind of product suite, we've actually enabled that, and we have partnered with all of those businesses, that both the companies that are offline generally by nature, but also the ones that are digital natives, and because calling and messaging is part of the workflow for all of these companies, and so enabling them and making sure that gets identified properly for the consumer, and that they have the choice to still mark that as spam, or let this pass through. That is part of the preferences that they will be able to set in TrueCaller, and which allows for these businesses to do genuine reach out when they've been asked to do so, but still blocks them from doing these reach outs when they're kind of doing business in a manner that is not accepted by the community at large.
So other operators are also going to launch their own solutions similar to Airtel's, because there's a TRAI directive for network operators to do this. Do you think this can have an impact on your business? In this sense, at least for consumers, some part of their problem is going to get resolved when someone's marked as a suspected spam. And we know that these systems improve over time. Airtel says that it has access to more signals because of the fact that they're on the network layer. So I'm just curious about what you think about A, multiple operators launching, B, about the impact on your business as that happens, because it seems to be a regulatory requirement now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the regulatory requirement is interesting, because what are you trying to protect the consumers from? Is it really, is it mainly the spam part, or is it mainly the fraud part? And I think that's an interesting thing to look at, like to talk about as well. But in general, when it comes to each of the carriers implementing a system like this, I would say it only allows for TrueCaller to stand out more, because we will already have that correct information, and we will already have your preference set up if you become a TrueCaller user. And over 300 million users in India currently with TrueCaller, and these users are going to have already set their preferences. Now, some of those users will be on Airtel, and what they will see on Airtel is going to be, suspected spam or something of the like. And what they will see on TrueCaller is Swiggy. So, I think they will, but in some of the cases, of course, there's going to be like, some company where you've never heard of that is doing mass outreach, and Airtel might catch it as spam, and we might also catch it as spam, and that's okay. I mean, as long as the consumer gets the benefit of being protected, that's good. What we're more concerned about is that their livelihood shouldn't be affected by the negative, the false negatives.
So, in fact, to address this, Airtel's MD has also said that he's written to other telcos asking them to cross-share details of B2B users with each other. So that may potentially address this B2B identification problem that telcos have. That could also impact you.
Yeah, I mean, the way we look at it is all of these things could impact us. We've seen kind of, I know, Airtel talks about this as the first AI intelligence and taking all these network signals, etc. But just like I believe he said in his address, that these systems have already been deployed in the US. They have similar systems in Middle East. They have similar systems in other countries. Now, Airtel's approach is unique to them, of course. And the problem, like the issues that people find concerning in India, it may be different from what they are in other countries. But we have yet to see that these network-based solutions actually have a net positive effect on people's ability to choose between taking the right opportunity and taking up that phone call when the credit card company that you've applied for is calling, and being able to sort out the things that is just nuisance.
So let's talk about identification as well. The telecom regulators proposed caller IDs across the ecosystem. What is your perspective on this? Do you think user identification is the solution to spam? Seeing someone's name when they call you helps. I mean, I'm just curious about how this impacts also the business that you do.
I mean, I think Medianama and others have reported on this with like what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and what is the tools that you're kind of deploying to resolve them. And I don't think that business identification resolves fraud. I think fraud detection that resolves fraud. And you need to kind of separate these. I understand why carriers would want to deploy business identification, but it's not to resolve fraud. That's not the reason. Like there's nothing that says that just because you can identify businesses, you will kind of have lower amounts of fraud happening, because fraudsters are not they're not working as a bank does in terms of like that there's rules and regulations for how they should behave. They are working more like
they probably have better tech than banks do.
I mean, that's one thing, but they also risk and experiment a lot more. Like when they catch on to something, it's kind of like the companies that are watching something on the internet go viral and just copying it instantly, and you won't even know which one was the original and which one was the meme that came after it. That's how they work, and then they switch overnight. They switch, and so those the same sims might lay dormant for months, and then they come back and do a new scheme. And so they're very different, and we've been investing in detecting fraud for the past 4 or 5 years, basically. Before that, we were mainly focused on spam, but
So
as
yes,
we
in
saw.
fact, sorry, please go on. No, I was just wondering about the fact that do you see the spam problem as separate from the scam problem? And how do they have to be dealt with separately?
No, we definitely see them as separate, and we work with them as different, with different products. Like it's within TrueCaller, you're seeing them as the same, but AI machine learning models that we have to detect them are very different. They're looking at completely different type of signals. Some of them are overlapping, obviously, but the specific ones when it comes to fraud and scam are like you need to track that type of history for a very long period before you can start to build models to detect them. And then on top of that, we have the community that is a vibrant community that is adding comments and these kind of things to TrueCaller every day. So if you look at every now and then you can check online, for instance on Twitter or X, and you can see people posting this person tried to do fraud, and they take a screenshot of TrueCaller, and then you see on that page you can see the comments that people have written, like this is a DHL fraud, this is the Mumbai police fraud, or something. Like they're actually writing stuff. They're giving you the answers because the community has already, some of them have already picked up on these numbers and kind of shared their feedback. So I think we're getting a tremendous amount of feedback from our consumers, but we're at the same time also developing our own systems. But my point was just that those systems work different, and they're uniquely different from the spam detection models. And I think more than spam, fraud is the thing that really enrages people, because most people think that they will never be scammed, and then you realize that your mom got scammed, or you realize that it wasn't you, it was your daughter that got scammed, and so these kind of things happen, and again, it's about protecting the livelihood of people, like both from the making sure that the upside gets there, but also that the downside is taken away, is blocked out, so that they don't have that risk.
So I was just on a slightly more philosophical note, I'm just curious about one thing. We've seen that the regulator has been taking an active role in terms of recommending solutions here, right? In terms of the need for AI/ML-based systems at the network operator level, the need for caller identification. And So their intent is right, even though they're prescribing a mechanism. They tried blockchain, for example, earlier. Um, I'm just curious about how active do you think a regulator should be in terms of prescribing solutions, and would you think is the right um, approach a regulator could take in order to enable a marketplace of ideas to address this problem? Because clearly, um, no one can solve this completely, right? And it's scaled exponentially over the last many years. What should the approach of the regulator be, in your opinion?
I mean, I think you kind of mentioned it there in the passing, but I think the marketplace of ideas, and then actually double clicking on what are the incentives, and how are they aligned with what that company is, what their solution is, because the problem is, when you have companies that have, for business reasons, an incentive to, for instance, increase the amount of calls that they make, or increase the amount of leads that they generate, then naturally the solution is going to be hampered by their own business objectives, and that obviously goes for someone like TrueCaller as well. But that's why we think very hard about how we build those products, so that, for instance, our verified business customers, they still have the spam markings despite being a customer at TrueCaller. Like, we're not taking away what the community feedback is, just because they are paying for the verified product, because they are paying to be verified, so that their customers are not tricked into thinking that this some other call is ICI. This is ICICI that you're speaking to. And I don't mean to pick on ICICI in any way. I'm just mentioning them as an example here. But my point is basically that you need to look at how the incentives are aligned. And I would say that among the data that we see, carriers in general, not calling out anyone specifically, and banks in general, not calling out anyone specifically, are the ones that have been making most of the spam calls. And that is what our reports have shown year after year. And so if that is part of your business model, then how does your incentives align when you're trying to protect consumers here? And that is kind of where I would say that the marketplace of ideas would be an more interesting approach, where you would open up for entities, whether they are under your regulatory gambit or not, to kind of share their ideas on how this could be resolved, and where you would kind of double click on what the incentives are, to make sure that the incentives are aligned correctly with what the consumers want and not anything else.
Interesting. The other thing I'm really curious about is that, we're seeing a gradual shift in spam um, to IP-based platforms like WhatsApp, and you've deployed a solution to address spam messages, maybe even scam on WhatsApp. Can you tell us how you managed to do that? Because that's an end-to-end encrypted environment.
Right. So it is an end-to-end encrypted environment. The header, though, is not encrypted in the notification. So to enable this service, you basically, it's a permission layer in Android that you need to enable. And once you have enabled that, that actually allows us to look at that header and help you determine whether this is spam or scam. And so that has been our approach, barring that we don't have any other way to do that, while it's still a concern among our users that, you know, they are getting bombarded with both spam and scam, you know, on WhatsApp. I mean, when WhatsApp opened up their messaging channel to larger amounts of CPaaS companies, what happened was that, you know, a scammer could go into one CPaaS company and start to send fraudulent or fraud messages. And the moment they got detected and blocked, they just went on to the next CPaaS company. And, you know, they would start to message with the exact same message, doing the exact same method. Everything was the same, but they would just keep on going from this one to the next one to the next one. And then they would also start to send from like other countries like Indonesia, or they would send messages from, you know, WhatsApp connections from Bangladesh or other countries, basically, and to Indian consumers, and sending these scam messages as like job offers, and, you know, you can earn X rupees per day by just sitting home at couch in the couch and stuff like that. And these all got reported to TrueCaller because people want us to be participating on that in that solution. Now it is more difficult for us to do that, but you know, we spoke to the team at WhatsApp and we launched our service, and I think both of us were happy that we were able to address the consumer needs that had arisen from them opening up their platform.
So, you know, one thing that we've seen historically is that whenever, just going back to India and SMS, whenever those regulations come in where, for example, SMS might become more expensive or calling might become more expensive, we've seen people switch to other mechanisms like using international numbers or using VoIP-based calling. How is TrueCaller addressing those shifts, especially when it's coming from an international number or over VoIP?
Well, when it is an international number, we actually
and quite often international numbers don't show up. You don't get caller identification data.
Right. Well, we've been lucky enough that we actually saw that trend already from like Europe and the US, where this was happening. Like a lot of the these type of calls that are happening both in Europe and the US are originating from a different country. And so, you know, we've actually been in other countries, we've been working to resolve exactly that issue. Now, if there's no caller identification, then I think that's definitely an issue that the regulator can and should step into. But when as long as there is a caller identification, then actually TrueCaller can do its job and protect the consumer.
You'd also announced an AI-based voice scanner that can detect deepfake calls. Could you share what the experience of the rollout of this tool in the US has been like, and what are you hearing from users in terms of accuracy? And is this in India as well? Like, what's the experience been?
I'm glad you noticed it. I think maybe Tesh, you can fill us in if it's been rolled out in India as well. I believe it has, but basically what the experience is like is that when you receive a call and you are kind of in doubt of whether this, because you know, this originated from when these voice cloning services became you know, too easy almost to use.
Yeah.
Scammers picked up on that, and they would go into Nikhil's Instagram account, and they would clone his voice and make it say something about needing money and some accident, etc., and then
Correct.
call Nikhil's wife and play up that voice in real time. Was in real time generating replies to, like, I need this money, honey, please send over this money, blah blah, to this account, like I'm in a car crash, something. And so, when your partner or relative gets that call, hearing Nikhil in like a distressed situation and being very upset, emotions are triggered. So you don't
Yes.
think with your logical side of the brain, you think with your emotional side of the brain, and you're like, I need to help. And what happens then is that you start to send out money and try to be helpful. Of course, but then when you hang up, what we've heard from a lot of consumers is only once you've hung up, you realize that, oh, maybe I should call back on Nikhil's actual phone number and check that it was him, and so on. And then when they do that, it's already too late. Right. So this is what we heard and the insights that we had. And then with that in mind, we created this service that you can call in at any point during your phone calls to just double check that this is happening. Now, in countries like US and in many other markets, we can actually do this on like, depending on the user's preference, it can be an always on service as well. So you can set it up as a like always on service, so that you don't even have to think about it. It's just happening in the background. But then in a market like India, because of like the telco, like the delays and stuff in the network, that experience is not up to par with what I think users would have wanted, and therefore we've chosen to only release it as a kind of opt-in per call solution, as opposed to being an always-on solution. But the always-on solution is really the preferred one. If you can get the call response or like call answer time to be within a certain bracket of like what's acceptable.
I had one last question. I mean, in India's data protection law uh, it was passed last year. It might be notified. The rules might come out at any time. We don't know what shape it's going to take, but I'm just curious because we used to talk about this as the TrueCaller challenge, because when you started, you would take data from someone's address book and then use that to identify people if they were being called by someone whose number they didn't have. And so the idea of consent in data sharing was a concern at that point in time. I'm just curious about how do you think India's data protection regulation might impact TrueCaller in its current form? And do you think data protection considerations might have an impact on detection of spam and scam in the country? Because it's a policy choice, right? At times, what you have is that data protection might become adversarial to the idea of detection of spam. I'm just curious if you had any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, in general, we feel very confident about, the practice of, uploading phone books, as it were, was actually stopped in TrueCaller in 2013. But having that said, that on the data protection bill, usually, when what we've seen in other markets, when these things, these changes happen, you're kind of, I don't know exactly how to phrase this correctly, but usually what happens is actually the door kind of gets closed behind you on like, so you think about how the privacy bill or GDPR in Europe was supposed to rein in on how much information Google or Facebook or Apple or what have you, how much information that they had, and make sure that everyone has a level playing field. The problem is that when you introduce these things, what you're doing is you're closing the door for others to operate the same way that those companies are operating, but at the same time, you're leaving a vacuum in terms of services that needs to be filled, and so people won't change their habits just because you introduce this bill. Like, the only thing that kind of happens is that you get more annoyance with the consumers in terms of pop-ups and things that they need to go through. And I'm speaking very bluntly here. And I think there is a good way of doing this and a poor way of doing this. And I actually think that the way India has chosen to implement this, at least from what our readings are, they've struck in a much finer and better balance than many other countries have, and I think that's great, and that should that's the kind of thinking that I appreciate, because then you've thought about what is the balance between the consumer's preferences and consumer choice, and like opt-in versus opt-out and all of these things. You've considered them in a much more in a deeper way than some other geographies I think have, which actually leaves many services to never being able to live up to their full potential. For instance, in Europe, you're trying to it would be really difficult to create a medical AI service that can help much faster detect cancer based on MR scans or something else. I mean, that obviously at the end of the day you would want a doctor to look at it, but just to make sure that it passes some screening filter very much quicker. How do you do that? You need to collect this information, and you need to collect consent, and then you need to store it in a specific way, and all these things. And that apparatus becomes so expensive that the whole medical health thing becomes more expensive. And I think the way that India approached this was to look at what is the utility, including the utility of blocking spam and scam, and actually protecting people from fraudsters and these kind of things. And so those things I think are very positive.
Nami, thank you so much for taking our time to speak with us. I think the space of spam and scam regulations in India is changing rapidly, even though spam and scam is growing. And maybe someday we'll have the kind of tech required to counter the, as someone talks about it as, we might have a spam stack to counter fraud stack. But thank you for working towards that. And thank you for taking time to speak with us.